I had just given birth when my 8-year-old daughter slipped quietly into my hospital room. Instead of running to hug me, Lily pulled the privacy curtain closed. Then she leaned close and whispered, "Mom, hide under the bed, right now." Before I could ask why, she was already tugging at my arm. We lowered ourselves to the floor, my body screaming from 20 hours of labor, and crawled beneath the hospital bed. Footsteps stopped outside my door. Lily's whole body trembled. Then she pressed her hand over my mouth. "My name is Rachel Bennett, and until that morning I believed I understood the people I loved." I was 38 years old, married to Daniel for 11 years, and lying in a maternity ward in Columbus, Ohio, with my newborn son sleeping in the bassinet beside the bed. We had named him Noah after my father, who had died 3 years earlier. His birth should have been one of the happiest days of my life. It had taken us 4 years, 2 miscarriages, and more appointments than I could count to get there. Daniel had cried when the doctor placed Noah on my chest. At least I thought those were real tears. He kissed my forehead, took a dozen pictures, and told every nurse who entered the room that I was the strongest woman he knew. By noon, he said he needed to leave for an hour. "Paperwork at the office," he explained, pulling on his navy coat. "Nothing that can't wait, but I want everything cleared before you and Noah come home." I remember smiling at him. "You're incapable of resting, aren't you?" He grinned, kissed me again, and said, "That's why you married me." Daniel was a financial advisor, the kind of man who remembered birthdays, wore polished brown shoes, and knew exactly how to make older clients feel safe. People trusted him because he looked trustworthy. I did too. His mother, Evelyn, had spent most of my pregnancy hovering nearby with casseroles, advice, and questions about our estate plan. She called it concern. I called it exhausting, though I usually kept that thought to myself. Lily arrived around 2 with my neighbor, Mrs. Carter. The moment my daughter stepped into the room, I knew something was wrong. She did not look at the baby. Normally, Lily would have rushed straight to me, talking too fast and asking whether she could hold her brother. Instead, she stood with one hand wrapped around the strap of her purple backpack, breathing as though she had run all the way from the elevator. She looked behind her. Then she shut the door. After we crawled under the bed, I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. Lily's hand was small, but she held it firmly over my mouth. Her eyes were wide and wet. The door opened. From where I lay, all I could see were shoes. Daniel's polished brown ones. Evelyn's black low heels. And a third pair, white hospital clogs. A woman's voice said, "We don't have much time." Daniel answered quietly, "Is everything ready?" "There won't be any complications." Evelyn exhaled. "And the cameras?" "Not in this room." My stomach turned cold. Then Daniel stepped closer to the bed and said words I would hear in my nightmares for years. "Once Rachel is gone, everything comes to me." Lily squeezed my face tighter as my breath caught. Evelyn whispered, "And the baby changes everything." At that moment, someone knocked sharply on the door. "Mrs. Bennett," a nurse called, "I'm coming in to check your vitals." The 3 pairs of shoes moved fast. The door opened, then closed again. Lily removed her hand from my mouth. Neither of us spoke. We simply stared at each other beneath that hospital bed, knowing that whatever family we had entered that room believing in no longer existed. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving only the steady hum of the air conditioner and the rapid pounding of my heart. For a second, neither Lily nor I moved. I could barely breathe, not because of the awkward position beneath the hospital bed, but because my mind refused to accept what I had just heard. Daniel, my husband, the man who had held my hand through labor, the father of both my children. There had to be another explanation. There simply had to be. A second knock came, followed immediately by the door opening. "Mrs. Bennett? It's Melissa. I'm just here to check your blood pressure." Lily looked at me. I nodded. Very carefully, trying not to cry out from the pain that shot through my abdomen, I crawled out from beneath the bed. Every muscle protested. 20 hours of labor had left my body weak, and lowering myself to the floor had been difficult enough. Climbing back onto the hospital bed felt almost impossible. Melissa, a middle-aged nurse with kind eyes and silver streaks in her dark hair, smiled as she entered. "There you are," she said pleasantly. "Your husband said you were resting." I forced a weak smile. I slipped getting out of bed. "Oh, honey, don't do that by yourself." She adjusted my pillow. "You've just delivered a baby. Ring for us. That's what we're here for." I glanced toward Noah. He was still asleep in the clear bassinet beside my bed, his tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful little breaths. Looking at him steadied me. Melissa wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. For one terrifying moment, I almost told her everything. I almost repeated Daniel's words. I almost asked whether the woman in white hospital clogs actually worked here. But what exactly would I say? That I'd hidden under my own hospital bed because my 8-year-old daughter was frightened? That I'd overheard half a conversation without seeing anyone's face? Melissa would probably think I was exhausted, emotional, or suffering from medication after childbirth. Instead, I swallowed my fear. "I'm just tired." She nodded knowingly. Every new mom says that. After checking my vitals, she smiled at Lily. "You must be the proud big sister." Lily managed a tiny nod. Melissa left a few minutes later, promising to return before dinner. The room fell silent again. I looked at my daughter. "Lily," I whispered, "tell me everything." She climbed carefully onto the chair beside my bed, twisting the zipper pull on her backpack over and over. "I wasn't trying to listen," she said quickly. "I know. I got lost." She stared at the floor. "I couldn't find your room after Mrs. Carter took me off the elevator. I thought I remembered the hallway." Her voice trembled. "Then I heard Dad." She looked up at me. "He didn't know I was there." I reached for her hand. "What did you hear?" "I was behind the corner. Grandma Evelyn was there too." She paused, trying to remember every word. "Dad said once she's gone..." Her voice became almost a whisper. "Grandma said, 'Everything comes to you.'" My skin prickled. "And then Dad said..." She closed her eyes tightly. "The baby changes everything." Exactly the words I had heard beneath the bed. Not similar. Exactly. "There was another lady," Lily continued. "She was wearing blue scrubs." "Did you recognize her?" She shook her head. "No." "Was she a nurse?" I don't think so." "What makes you say that?" Lily frowned. "She didn't have one of those computers that the nurses carry." That was true. Every nurse I'd seen all morning carried either a tablet or a clipboard. "What was she carrying?" Lily hesitated. Then she looked directly into my eyes. She had a little plastic bracelet. I frowned. "What kind of bracelet?" "The kind babies wear." The room suddenly felt several degrees colder. Lily swallowed hard. "It was really tiny." She held 2 fingers about 4 inches apart. And she kept looking at it. I slowly turned toward Noah's bassinet. His own identification bracelet rested securely around his tiny ankle. Every newborn in the maternity ward wore one. Why would an unfamiliar woman be carrying another infant bracelet? Before I could ask another question, voices drifted into the hallway outside my room. One of them belonged unmistakably to Daniel. The other was the same unfamiliar woman's voice. They had come back. I instinctively reached for Lily's hand. Neither of us spoke. Daniel's voice drifted through the closed door, calm and familiar, exactly the same tone he used when reassuring anxious clients. "Just give us another few minutes." The woman answered too softly for me to make out every word. Then I heard footsteps moving away. Only after the hallway fell quiet again did I realize I had been holding my breath. Lily leaned closer. "Mom, are we going home with Dad?" The question pierced me more deeply than anything I had heard that afternoon. I wanted to tell her yes. I wanted to tell her everything was a misunderstanding. Instead, I kissed the top of her head. "We're going to be careful." That was the only promise I could honestly make. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of nurses checking my incision, lactation consultants helping Noah feed for the first time, and well-meaning hospital staff congratulating us. Daniel finally returned carrying flowers, a coffee for himself, and a stuffed blue elephant for Noah. He looked exactly like the husband I'd known for more than a decade. He smiled. He laughed with the nurses. He adjusted my blanket. He even rubbed my shoulders. If I hadn't heard his conversation, if Lily hadn't heard it first, I would have believed every gesture. "You look exhausted," he said softly. "I feel exhausted." He chuckled. "Parenting 2 kids is going to be an adventure." I searched his face for guilt, for fear, for anything. I found nothing. His expression was warm, relaxed, almost affectionate. That frightened me even more. A guilty man acting nervous would have made sense. A man calmly pretending nothing had happened was far more dangerous. Evelyn arrived half an hour later carrying homemade chicken soup in a thermal container. "My poor girl," she said, kissing my forehead. "You need real food, not hospital food." She looked exactly as she always had. Perfectly styled silver hair, pearl earrings, and a cardigan that somehow never had a wrinkle. She smiled at Noah. She smiled at Lily. Then she smiled at me. The same woman who, only hours earlier, had quietly asked whether the cameras covered my hospital room. I forced myself to smile back. If they believed I knew nothing, they might become careless. That thought stayed with me for the rest of the visit. Late that evening, after visiting hours ended, Daniel finally went home to shower and sleep. Evelyn left with him. Lily had already gone home with Mrs. Carter. For the first time all day, I was alone. Almost. Noah slept peacefully beside me. I picked up my phone and opened the Notes app. Instead of trying to make sense of everything, I wrote down every detail I could remember. The exact words. The order in which they were spoken. The time Daniel left. The time Lily arrived. The description of the woman in scrubs. I even noted the color of the hospital clogs. Memory fades. Evidence shouldn't. My father had taught me that years earlier when he owned a small construction company. "People remember feelings," he used to say. "Courtrooms remember details." I suddenly wished he were still alive. He would have known exactly what to do. Around 9 that night, a young nurse wheeled Noah to the nursery for his routine newborn hearing screening. "We'll only be gone about 20 minutes, she assured me. The moment they left, I sat upright despite the pain. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I was looking for patterns. Over the past year, how many decisions had Daniel encouraged? The answer unsettled me. He had insisted we increase my life insurance after I became pregnant. "It protects the family," he'd said. He persuaded me to update my will. He recommended consolidating several investment accounts under paperwork that he conveniently prepared himself. Even stranger, he repeatedly discouraged me from discussing our financial planning with my longtime attorney. "I handle this professionally every day," he'd laughed. "We don't need to pay someone else." At the time, it had sounded practical. Now, each memory slid into place like another piece of a puzzle I had never realized I was solving. None of those decisions had frightened me individually. Together, they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. When Noah returned safely to my room, relief washed over me so intensely that tears filled my eyes. I wasn't crying because he was back. I was crying because I suddenly understood something terrifying. If Daniel had spent months quietly arranging our finances, then whatever I had overheard that afternoon hadn't been an impulsive decision. It had been a plan. And plans that take months to build rarely stop after their first failure. Before midnight, while the hospital floor grew quiet, I searched my contacts and found the number I hadn't needed in years. Margaret Ellis. My father's attorney. Not Daniel's. Mine. My thumb hovered over the call button. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I intended to make the most important phone call of my life. I barely slept that night. Every time a cart rolled down the hallway or a door opened somewhere on the maternity floor, my eyes flew open. Noah slept peacefully beside me, making the soft little sounds newborns make. Tiny sighs, gentle squeaks, the occasional stretch that seemed impossibly small. I watched him for hours. Not because I was simply a new mother, because I was suddenly afraid someone might try to take him away. At exactly 8 o'clock, After the morning shift changed and my nurse stepped out to retrieve my breakfast tray, I picked up my phone and called Margaret Ellis. She answered on the third ring. "Margaret Ellis? It's Rachel Bennett." There was a brief pause. "Rachel, I thought you were having your baby this week." "I did." "Oh, sweetheart, congratulations." "Thank you." My voice cracked. "I need your help." The warmth disappeared from her tone immediately. "What happened?" I glanced toward the closed hospital door. "I don't think I should explain over the phone." Another pause. Then she spoke carefully. "Are you in immediate danger?" I don't know. "Can anyone hear you?" "I don't think so." "Rachel, answer only yes or no. Do you believe someone may be trying to harm you or your child?" I closed my eyes. Yes. "I'll be there within an hour." She hung up. No unnecessary questions. No disbelief. Just action. That was one of the reasons my father had trusted Margaret for nearly 30 years. She never panicked. She solved problems. Margaret arrived just after 9, carrying nothing more than a leather briefcase and a paper cup of coffee. She looked exactly as I remembered. Early 60s, silver hair cut neatly at her shoulders, calm blue eyes behind thin reading glasses. When the nurse left us alone, Margaret quietly locked the hospital room door. Then she pulled a small legal pad from her briefcase. "Start from the beginning." I told her everything. The labor. Daniel leaving. Lily getting lost. The whispered conversation. The woman in blue scrubs. The infant bracelet. The words beneath the bed. Margaret interrupted only twice. "Repeat the exact sentence." "Don't paraphrase." When I finished, she remained silent for nearly a full minute. Finally, she asked, "Rachel, has Daniel encouraged any major financial changes recently?" A chill ran through me. "Several." I described the life insurance policy, the revised estate documents, the investment accounts, his insistence that I didn't need outside legal advice. Margaret slowly nodded. "Did you sign everything?" "Most of it." "Do you have copies?" "I think so." "We'll review every page." She closed the legal pad. "I want to be very clear. What you've described isn't proof of a crime." "I know. But it is enough to justify protecting yourself while we determine what's actually happening." Relief flooded through me. She believed me. Not completely. Not blindly. But enough to take the situation seriously. Margaret made 3 phone calls before leaving the room. The first was to a licensed private investigator she had worked with for years. The second was to a retired Columbus police lieutenant who now specialized in corporate fraud investigations. The third surprised me. She asked to speak with the hospital's patient advocacy office. Not security. Patient advocacy. After hanging up, she explained why. If someone inside this hospital is helping an outsider, confronting security too early could alert the wrong person. That possibility hadn't even occurred to me. I felt another wave of nausea. "From this moment forward," Margaret continued, "don't accuse Daniel of anything." I wasn't planning to. "Good. Should I tell the nurses?" "Only if there's an immediate threat." She leaned forward. "If Daniel believes you know nothing, he'll behave naturally. And if he doesn't? Then he'll change his plan." She looked directly into my eyes. "I'd rather investigate the plan he's already using than force him to invent a new one." That afternoon, while Noah slept against my chest, a hospital volunteer delivered flowers from Daniel. The card read, "You and our little miracle are my whole world. Love always, Daniel." I stared at the elegant handwriting. Just 24 hours earlier, those words would have made me cry with happiness. Now they made my skin crawl. About an hour later, Margaret texted me. "Our investigator has already confirmed one unusual fact." A second message appeared almost immediately. "The woman Lily described does not appear on today's employee roster." My heartbeat quickened. Then a third message arrived. "We're checking surveillance footage and visitor logs now. Do not mention this to anyone." I slowly looked toward the hallway outside my room. Somewhere in this hospital, a woman wearing borrowed scrubs had walked its corridors carrying an infant identification bracelet. And according to the first piece of evidence we had found, She had never been authorized to be there in the first place. Margaret called just after sunrise the following morning. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. "Rachel, we've confirmed several things." I instinctively tightened my arms around Noah, who was sleeping peacefully after his early feeding. "I'm listening." The woman wasn't simply visiting the maternity floor. A pause. "She never should have been inside the hospital." I felt my stomach knot. "Our investigator identified her." Another pause. "Her name is Denise Harper. She worked as a nursing assistant years ago." Worked? Her license was revoked after she falsified patient records. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. A woman with a history of falsifying medical records had somehow walked into the maternity ward on the very day my son was born. How did she get in? We're still trying to answer that. By late morning, Margaret and the private investigator Tom Reynolds arrived together. Tom was in his late 50s, soft-spoken, with the patient manner of someone who had spent decades interviewing people instead of intimidating them. He spread several printed photographs across the small table beside my hospital bed. "This is Denise." I immediately recognized the woman. Not her face, I had never seen it clearly. But the blue scrubs, the white clogs, the silver tote bag Lily had described. Security cameras caught her entering through an employee entrance yesterday morning. "With an employee badge?" Tom nodded. "Not her own." He slid another photograph toward me. "She followed someone else through a restricted door." "So someone helped her?" "Almost certainly." The realization sent a chill through me. This wasn't one dishonest outsider. Someone inside the hospital appeared to be cooperating. Tom continued. "There's something else." He placed a floor map of the maternity unit on the table. "I requested surveillance footage from every hallway Denise walked through. And one camera recorded her entering this corridor." His finger moved across the map. "The next camera should have recorded her leaving." "It didn't?" "It couldn't." "Why?" "The footage was deleted." The room suddenly felt impossibly quiet. "Deleted?" "Only 11 minutes." He looked directly at me. "Just enough time for someone to disappear." I remembered Evelyn asking one simple question beneath my hospital bed. And the cameras? At the time, I thought she was merely curious. Now I realized she had probably been checking whether the plan could unfold without being recorded. Margaret opened a folder containing copies of my estate documents. "We've also reviewed the paperwork Daniel prepared over the last year." She turned several pages toward me. "Nothing here is illegal." I frowned. "But there is a pattern." She pointed to highlighted sections. "If you died unexpectedly, Daniel would temporarily control nearly every financial decision involving your estate." I swallowed hard. "What about Noah?" "Your father's trust activates additional protections after the birth of another child." I looked down at my sleeping son. "So that's what Evelyn meant." Margaret nodded slowly. "The baby changes everything." Neither of us had to explain the sentence anymore. For the first time, it actually made sense. That afternoon, my pediatric nurse, Karen, entered to prepare Noah for his discharge examination. She was in her early 60s, calm, efficient, and clearly the kind of nurse who noticed details other people overlooked. She gently lifted Noah's tiny foot. Then she stopped. Her smile disappeared. "That's odd." My heart skipped. "What is?" Karen looked closely at the identification bracelet around Noah's ankle. Without saying another word, she picked up his bassinet chart. She compared the numbers. Then she checked his mother's identification band around my wrist. Her expression changed completely. "I'll be right back." She hurried from the room. I stared after her, terrified. Less than 3 minutes later, Karen returned with the charge nurse and the pediatrician. No one smiled. The charge nurse asked politely, "Mrs. Bennett, has anyone besides hospital staff handled your baby's identification bracelet?" "No." "Has anyone removed it?" "Never." The pediatrician carefully examined the band. Then he looked at the chart. Finally, he exhaled. "Someone attempted to replace this bracelet." My blood ran cold. "What?" Karen answered quietly. The plastic clasp is from a different production batch than the bracelet assigned to your son yesterday. She shook her head in disbelief. I only noticed because I've worked here 32 years. The room fell silent. Had she been even slightly less experienced? No one would have questioned it. The bracelet looked almost perfect. Almost. Margaret slowly reached for my hand. Without raising her voice, she said to the charge nurse, I believe this hospital needs to begin an internal investigation immediately. For the first time since Noah was born, someone besides me understood that this wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had tried to change my baby's identity, and they had come frighteningly close to succeeding. The atmosphere in my hospital room changed within minutes. The charge nurse quietly closed the door. The pediatrician asked another nurse to wheel Noah's bassinet into the staff nursery, where access required electronic badges, and every entrance was monitored. I don't want him out of our sight, he said. For the first time since giving birth, I let someone else carry my son away without protesting. Not because I trusted the hospital completely. Because I trusted Karen. The look on her face told me she was personally invested now. Someone had tried to violate the sacred routine she'd followed for more than 3 decades. She wasn't going to let it happen again. Hospital administrators arrived before noon. They apologized repeatedly, promised a thorough investigation, and assured me that both of my children would receive additional protection while I remained admitted. One administrator carefully explained that they were notifying state regulators because any suspected tampering with newborn identification required immediate reporting. I appreciated the professionalism, but my mind was somewhere else. Daniel. He still didn't know that the bracelet had been discovered. He still believed, as far as I could tell, that everything was unfolding according to plan. Margaret leaned close while the administrators spoke. That's an advantage. What is? If he thinks the plan succeeded, he'll be less careful. That afternoon, Tom Reynolds returned carrying another thick folder. His expression told me he hadn't brought good news. I've been digging into Daniel's finances. I closed my eyes for a second. How bad? Worse than we expected. He opened the file. For years, Daniel appeared successful. He was. On paper. Tom slid several documents across the table. Privately, he accumulated enormous gambling debts. I stared at the figures. The numbers barely seemed real. Credit lines. Private loans, cash advances, payments to online betting accounts. Millions of dollars had disappeared over several years. He couldn't have hidden this. He didn't. Tom pointed to another document. He disguised many transactions inside client investment accounts. My stomach dropped. You mean, he appears to have stolen from people who trusted him? Mostly retirees, widows, longtime clients. The very people who believed Daniel treated their savings as carefully as he treated his own family. I felt physically sick. Every holiday dinner. Every church fundraiser. Every neighborhood barbecue where people praised my husband for helping them prepare for retirement. It had all been built on lies. Margaret quietly opened another folder. This concerns your father's trust. I immediately recognized the familiar paperwork. My father had established the trust after selling his construction company, insisting it would protect future generations of our family. I never really understood all of it. You didn't need to. She adjusted her glasses. The trust was originally designed to benefit you. She turned another page. When Noah was born, a dormant provision automatically activated. What provision? A substantial inheritance earmarked specifically for any future grandchildren. I frowned. So Noah became a beneficiary. Exactly. She looked directly at me. Not through your will. Automatically. The realization hit me almost instantly. If Daniel had been drowning in debt, and suddenly learned that Noah's birth unlocked additional family assets, everything changed. The baby changes everything. Those words echoed inside my mind again. Not because Noah himself mattered financially. Because his existence unlocked money Daniel desperately needed. Tom nodded slowly. We believe that's why Denise Harper entered the hospital. To steal Noah? Perhaps. He didn't pretend certainty. But creating confusion about a newborn's identity could delay access to the trust, interfere with guardianship, or create enough legal chaos for forged documents to be introduced. It wouldn't have worked forever. No. He leaned forward. But fraud doesn't always require permanence. Sometimes criminals only need a short window. A few weeks. A few forged signatures. Temporary authority. Long enough to move money before anyone realized what had happened. I suddenly understood why Daniel had spent months reorganizing our finances. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime born out of panic. It was an elaborate contingency plan. My pregnancy hadn't created the conspiracy. It had accelerated it. Late that evening, Daniel arrived carrying fresh flowers and balloons. He smiled exactly as he always had. "How are my favorite people?" I looked into his eyes. For 11 years, those eyes had represented home. Now they looked like carefully polished glass. Beautiful. Cold. Empty. He leaned over to kiss my forehead. I let him. Not because I forgave him. Because Margaret had been right. If Daniel believed I remained the trusting wife he'd always known, he might continue revealing the truth one careless step at a time. As he reached into Noah's bassinet and gently touched our son's tiny hand, he smiled with convincing tenderness. Anyone watching would have seen a devoted father. Only I knew I was looking at a man who no longer frightened me because of what he had already done. He frightened me because I still didn't know how far he was willing to go. 3 days later, Noah and I were discharged from the hospital. But we did not go home. That decision broke my heart. For months, I had imagined carrying my son through the front door of the little brick house where Lily had grown up. I had pictured introducing him to the nursery we had painted pale green together, placing him in the crib Daniel had supposedly built with his own hands, and sitting in the rocking chair beside the window while Lily read him children's books. Instead, Margaret met us at a private hospital exit. There was no celebration. No family photographs. No balloons tied to the car. Just a quiet black SUV driven by Tom Reynolds. Lily climbed into the back seat beside me and slipped her small hand into mine. "Are we going home later?" she whispered. I looked at Margaret. She answered gently before I could. "For a little while, sweetheart, we're staying somewhere safe." Lily nodded without arguing. Children often understand more than adults realize. She had stopped asking questions whose answers she already feared. The safe residence belonged to a retired judge who occasionally allowed victims of financial crimes and domestic threats to stay in a private guest cottage on his property. It wasn't a shelter. It looked like an ordinary home tucked behind tall maple trees on the edge of Columbus. There was a small porch, a vegetable garden, and an old golden retriever named Charlie who immediately decided Lily was his new best friend. For the first time in days, I saw my daughter smile. Only for a moment. But it was enough to remind me that she was still 8 years old. Not a witness. Not a protector. Just a little girl who should have been worrying about spelling tests instead of conspiracies. Daniel began calling before we had even unpacked. The first voicemail sounded concerned. "Rachel, the hospital said you'd already been discharged. Where are you? I was bringing dinner." The second sounded confused. "Your phone's going straight to voicemail. Please call me." By the fifth message, his concern had become impatience. "Rachel, this isn't funny. Lily needs to come home." Margaret instructed me not to answer immediately. Let him wonder. So he panics? So he talks. There was a difference. Panic made people reckless. Silence made them feel it. The next morning, she helped me send a brief text. "We're staying with friends while I recover. The baby needs quiet. I'll contact you when I'm ready." Nothing more. No address. No explanation. Daniel replied less than 30 seconds later. "Which friends?" I didn't answer. Another message appeared. "I'll come pick you up." Still nothing. Then came one that made my stomach tighten. "I need to discuss some paperwork before the bank closes this week." Paperwork. Not us. Not Noah. Not Lily. Paperwork. Margaret looked over my shoulder and quietly smiled for the first time since this nightmare had begun. He just made his first mistake. Meanwhile, Tom continued investigating Daniel's business. Each day seemed to uncover another layer. Another hidden account. Another forged signature. Another retired couple whose investments had quietly disappeared. Federal financial investigators had now joined the case. Daniel still didn't know. As far as he believed, he was simply trying to persuade his overly emotional wife to come home. One afternoon, I found Lily sitting alone on the porch steps, hugging Charlie around the neck. She looked unusually quiet. I sat beside her, careful not to wake Noah sleeping in his carrier. After a long silence, she asked, "Mom." "Yes?" "Did I ruin our family?" The question stole the air from my lungs. She kept staring at the grass. "If I hadn't listened, if I hadn't told you, maybe Dad wouldn't be in trouble." I turned toward her completely. "Lily." She finally looked at me. There were tears balanced in her eyes. "I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear." "No." I gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "You heard something someone should never have said." She blinked. "But..." "You didn't break this family." I took both of her hands. "The choices that broke this family were made by adults." She began crying quietly. I pulled her into my arms. "You didn't destroy us." I kissed the top of her head, exactly as I had when she was little. "You saved us." She buried her face against my shoulder and cried harder than she had at any point since Noah was born. Not from fear, from relief. Sometimes children carry guilt that was never theirs to bear. That afternoon, I made myself another promise. No matter how long this battle lasted, Daniel would answer for what he had done. But Lily would never again have to carry the weight of his choices. 2 weeks passed before the first arrest. It wasn't Daniel's. It was Denise Harper's. Tom called just after breakfast. They picked her up this morning. I was pouring cereal for Lily while Noah slept in his portable bassinet beside the kitchen table. My hand froze. Did she talk? Not at first. And now? Tom exhaled slowly. Now she's asking for an attorney. That wasn't the answer I wanted. But it wasn't the worst one either. People who planned to keep lying rarely asked to negotiate. By then, our days had settled into an unfamiliar routine. Lily attended school remotely from the cottage using a loaner laptop provided by her elementary school. Every afternoon, she walked Charlie around the property while I fed Noah, or tried to catch an hour of sleep. The judge and his wife treated us like distant relatives instead of frightened guests. Mrs. Harrison often left homemade soup on our porch without knocking. Judge Harrison never asked questions about the investigation. He simply reminded me every evening, "Locks are checked." It was a simple sentence. Somehow it made the house feel safer. 3 days after Denise's arrest, Margaret arrived carrying another folder. This one was much thinner. She made a deal. I looked up immediately. "What kind of deal?" "A cooperation agreement." Margaret sat across from me. She admitted she entered the hospital under false credentials. "And the bracelet?" She carried a duplicate infant identification band. I closed my eyes. So Lily remembered correctly. Every detail. Margaret waited before continuing. "Denise says Daniel recruited her." The room became perfectly still. Not suspected. Not believed. Admitted. He promised to pay off her debts. I swallowed hard. What exactly was she supposed to do? Margaret chose her words carefully. According to her statement, she wasn't instructed to harm anyone. That mattered. Because while Daniel's crimes were horrifying, I wanted the truth, not exaggeration. Her job, Margaret continued, was to create confusion. How? By replacing Noah's identification bracelet and delaying the verification process. So someone else could step in? Possibly. She shook her head. She claims Daniel never explained the entire plan. I believed that. People who organize conspiracies rarely share every detail with every participant. The hospital's internal investigation moved just as quickly. One employee admitted allowing Denise through a restricted entrance in exchange for cash. Another confessed to deleting 11 minutes of hallway surveillance footage. Neither claimed to know Daniel personally. Both admitted they had been instructed by Denise. The chain was becoming clearer. Not perfect, but clear enough. The biggest development came a week later. Federal agents executed search warrants at Daniel's financial office before it opened for business. Television news helicopters circled overhead. Neighbors called one another. Former clients gathered on the sidewalk in stunned silence. By lunchtime, every major local station was reporting the story. The headline wasn't about the hospital. It was about investment fraud. Authorities alleged that Daniel had stolen millions of dollars from elderly clients over several years. The hospital investigation appeared only halfway through the news report. To the public, Daniel looked like another respected financial advisor who had betrayed the trust of people preparing for retirement. Only a handful of investigators understood how close that financial desperation had come to destroying my family as well. Months later, I finally saw Daniel again. Not across a dinner table. Not in our living room. Across a courtroom. He wore a gray suit instead of the expensive navy ones he had always preferred. His hair was shorter. His shoulders looked heavier. He glanced toward me exactly once. Then he looked away. The prosecutor asked me to describe the day Noah was born. I answered calmly. I repeated only what I had personally seen. Only what I had personally heard. Nothing more. Nothing less. Margaret had reminded me countless times that truthful testimony didn't need embellishment. The facts were powerful enough. Daniel's attorney chose not to question Lily. The judge had already ruled that her earlier recorded interview, conducted with a child forensic specialist, was sufficient. When I heard that decision, I quietly thanked God. She had already carried enough. She deserved to stay a child. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I looked once more at the man I had loved for 11 years. I expected anger, hatred. Instead, I felt something much quieter. Grief. Not for the husband sitting at the defense table. For the husband I had believed existed. Because I finally understood they had never been the same man. The verdict was returned on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I remember the weather because it matched the heaviness that had settled over everyone in the courtroom. No one celebrated. There were no dramatic outbursts, no applause, no triumphant speeches like the ones television loves to show. Real justice rarely looks like that. It looks like ordinary people sitting silently while lives change forever. The jury found Daniel guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, investment fraud, conspiracy, and related financial crimes. The separate charges connected to the hospital conspiracy would be resolved through additional proceedings. But Denise Harper's testimony, the deleted surveillance records, the altered identification bracelet, and the financial evidence had already painted a devastating picture. Daniel closed his eyes as the verdict was read. For just a moment, he looked like a tired, broken man. Then I remembered the retired couples whose savings had disappeared. I remembered the mothers who trusted that maternity ward. Most of all, I remembered an 8-year-old girl pulling her injured mother beneath a hospital bed. Compassion did not erase accountability. Evelyn's case ended differently. She accepted a plea agreement after admitting she had knowledge of the conspiracy and had chosen to remain silent instead of stopping it. She received probation, community service, financial penalties, and a permanent prohibition from serving as a trustee or financial guardian. Some people asked whether I was disappointed she avoided prison. I wasn't. At 72, she would spend the rest of her life living with the consequences of her own decisions. Justice does not always require the harshest punishment. It requires the right one. The civil lawsuits unfolded over the following year. Former clients recovered part of their stolen retirement savings through insurance claims, court-ordered restitution, and the liquidation of Daniel's remaining assets. It wasn't enough to restore every lost dollar. But it was enough to restore something just as valuable. Hope. Several of those couples wrote me letters. Not because I had recovered their money. Because exposing Daniel had prevented him from victimizing anyone else. One letter from an 80-year-old widow stayed with me. She wrote, "I thought I was foolish for trusting him. Thank you for proving that kindness isn't foolish, dishonesty is." I kept that letter in my bedside drawer. Whenever the guilt tried to creep back in, Whenever I wondered how I could have lived beside a man without seeing who he really was, I read those words again. The hospital also faced its own reckoning. They publicly acknowledged failures in visitor screening and internal oversight. New electronic safeguards were added to every maternity unit entrance. Identification procedures became stricter. Staff received additional training on newborn security. Karen called me a few months later. "I thought you'd like to know," she said. "We've named the updated protocol after the first nurse who caught the bracelet discrepancy." I smiled. "You?" She laughed softly. "No. The committee insisted. I couldn't think of anyone more deserving. One experienced nurse had trusted her instincts instead of assuming everything was fine. Because of that, countless families would be safer. When the final civil judgment was entered, Margaret helped me make one last decision. A portion of the damages awarded to me legally belonged to our family. Another portion represented compensation for what Noah and I had endured. I could have invested every penny. Instead, I established the Noah Bennett Family Safety Fund. It wasn't large enough to change the world, but it provided grants to hospitals across central Ohio for newborn security education, volunteer family advocates, and emergency assistance for mothers recovering from traumatic births. "It feels right," Margaret said after signing the paperwork. "It feels like Dad would approve." I think he already does. That evening, Lily helped me water flowers outside the cottage before we finally prepared to move into a new home. She looked up at me and smiled. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen in many months. "You know what?" "What?" "I don't feel scared all the time anymore." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Neither did I. Not because the past had disappeared. Because justice had finally made room for peace. 1 year later, I stood in the backyard of our new home, watching Noah smash his tiny hands into the frosting of his first birthday cake. He laughed so hard that he nearly tipped out of his high chair. Everyone laughed with him. Lily laughed the loudest. For a long moment, I simply stood there with my paper plate untouched, letting the sound wash over me. A year earlier, I had been hiding beneath a hospital bed, praying my children and I would survive whatever nightmare was unfolding around us. Now I was watching both of them chase bubbles across a quiet backyard on a warm Ohio afternoon. Life hadn't returned to what it had been. It had become something entirely different. Something stronger. The guest list was small. Mrs. Carter stood beside the grill talking with Judge and Mrs. Harrison. Karen stopped by after finishing her hospital shift, carrying a children's book instead of another stuffed animal. Margaret arrived last, exactly 10 minutes late as always, pretending traffic was responsible when everyone knew she simply hated arriving early to parties. Tom came too. He no longer carried folders every time I saw him. Instead, he carried balloons. That seemed like a much healthier habit. As I looked around the yard, I realized something important. Not one person there had been connected to us by obligation. They were there because when our lives fell apart, they chose to help. Sometimes family is built by blood. Sometimes it is built by character. I understood the difference now. The divorce had been finalized months earlier. I kept the house. Daniel surrendered parental rights to Noah as part of the final court orders after lengthy legal proceedings, while Lily's future contact with him remained subject to the family court's careful supervision and the recommendations of her therapist. Those decisions had not been made to punish him. They had been made to protect